Wonderful, thank you very much. Uh, so today we're going to be talking about everything that's new in iOS 9. So Apple announced iOS 9, I think it was on the 8th of June earlier this year. So we've had a while now to make sure our apps are up to date. But it's been in the hands of the public since the 16th of September. So actually, you may have been putting off doing the updates, implementing the new APIs. You're just like, it's not in the public hands yet, we'll hold off a while. So in this webinar, I'm going to go through what's new and what are the features that I think you might be interested in implementing into your app. So let's get started. One of the more interesting things that Apple announced just recently with the iPhone 6s is 3D Touch. So for those of you who don't know, 3D Touch is basically Force Touch. If you've used an Apple Watch, you'll know that it's you push a bit harder, kind of like the long press on Android, where you can get to contextual menus and extra bits and bobs. But it's got some interesting APIs that we'll look into in a moment. But one of the features of 3D Touch is the pressure sensitivity. So if you're developing a drawing app, and let's take Touch Draw as an example, that's a vector drawing app that runs on OS 10, Android, iPhone, and iPad, and that's built entirely with Xamarin in C#. Well, the developer for that application can implement this pressure sensitivity so that when the user on the iPad, or sorry, on the iPhone 6s presses down harder, the amount that we're drawing changes as if you've got a felt tip pen and you're pushing harder on a piece of paper. But let's be honest, most of us aren't writing apps for drawing. So how else can we utilize this functionality of the device? Well, Apple gave us this concept of peek and pop, and this actually really interests me. So historically, you've got your master detail application, you've got a list that's describing items, be it a hotel or beers, or it could be anything. And your user taps on that item and they go into the detail view and they look at the content, they read it, and then they discover that that's not actually what they were looking for. So they press back and then they're back into the list view and they continue going through. Well, with peek and pop, what Apple have allowed us to do is implement so that when the user hard presses on an item in the UI table view controller, we can preview the view controller that it's about to go and show. And this is implemented with a really simple method, which is get view controller for preview, which is as part of the delegate, because obviously we do the delegate pattern with iOS. But it allows the user to just very quickly see if the content is actually what they want. And 9 times out of 10, we developers, have already instantiated the view that the user has just selected themselves or ready to navigate to it if they do decide that that's what they want to look at. So it's not too much extra work to add this. Really nice feature. And what we also do with this API is we specify what part of the view we want to see. So it might be that, if I've got a hotel app where I can book hotels, all I really care about previewing is the image, so their splash screen image to try and entice me to go there, and the ratings and what star it is. So it's like a 4-star and it's got 1,000 6 out of 10 reviews. So that's the only bit I'm interested in previewing. So we can say when we do the get view controller for preview, we can say what we actually want to preview. And we pass in a CG rect, which is just a rectangle for iOS, and iOS will deal with blurring everything else out. So we only focus on the content that's important to us. So it's extraordinarily simple to add, but it only is supported on the iPhone 6s at the moment. Apple also gave us quick actions, and you can think of these as effectively the mobile equivalent of right-click. It's a contextual menu. And these are just, and this is going to be a common theme throughout this webinar, that all of these APIs are just small additions to your app. None of these are going to take you more than 20 minutes each to implement. It's extraordinarily quick to get started with these. With quick actions and the contextual menus, it's just an enum that you add to your app delegate. so that you can click and hold or tap and hold on an icon and get to some quick actions that the user can perform. So if we take, Twitter have implemented that you can quickly tweet, so you can get to the compose view within the Twitter app. The photo or the camera app, you use a quick action, you tap and hold, and it brings up, do I want to take a square photo, do I want to take a slow motion video, or just a standard photo? So you can get to the options of the application much quicker. And again, super simple to implement. It's really not that difficult. I think quick action should probably take you about 10 minutes to implement, assuming that you've already got places within your application that it makes sense to jump to quickly. So there's a couple of caveats with 3D Touch. The first one being that it is only for the iPhone 6s. So if you're building apps for employees, which I see quite a few of you are, if it's not a bring your own device and they're all sporting the same make of phone, then it's probably not going to be worth implementing this. But if you're building a consumer app, then I highly recommend implementing it because it is just so easy. But if you don't have an iPhone 6s to test on, you're going to struggle, because Apple haven't given us the ability to test this within the iOS simulator. You're going to have a physical device in order to do the testing. Now, I know that the team are working on adding these APIs into Calabash so that we can use it from UI test. So you could, in a future, be able to test this within Test Cloud, but right now you're going to need a physical device to do the testing. So let's have a look at how do you actually implement this? Well, just like when Apple gave us the ability to track how many steps we take with the A7 processor, which was in, I think it was the iPhone 5s, you had a very simple API where you could query Core Motion, and you can say, hey, does this device support step counting? And Core Motion would say yes or no. Well, we've got a very similar situation here with 3D Touch. So we say, does this device support Force Touch capability? Now, this isn't a yes or a no answer, simply for the fact that the device may actually support it, but the user may have turned it off. So what we have is available or unavailable, but it's effectively, yay or nay. And once you know that the device actually supports 3D Touch, well, how do you implement it? And as I mentioned before, it's delegate-based, so our view controllers and our UI table view controllers have an extra property, which is UI view controller previewing delegate. So we would create our own UI view controller previewing delegate. It just rolls off the tongue, super simple to say. But we would create a class and we would inherit from this, and we would override the methods. But the important method that you want to override is the get view controller for preview. And all you're simply doing, as you can see here, is you're returning a UI view controller, which is a UI view controller that you're interested in previewing. So it's extraordinarily simple to get this implemented into your app. And Apple give a lot of kudos to apps that have all the latest features of the OS. So if you want to stand a chance of getting featured by one of the editors on the App Store, to have your app on the first screen for any country, you're going to need to be using these latest and greatest APIs. And as I say, extraordinarily easy to get implemented. So there isn't really any reason not to add these. You could probably, if you did one every lunchtime, you could have almost all the new features of iOS implemented by the end of the week. So I want to talk a little bit about multitasking. So Apple with the iPad Pro and the iPad 4, I think it is, have implemented multitasking. And historically, when we run our iPad apps, we get the full resources of the device, and we also get every single pixel on the screen. So we could afford to be quite selfish as developers. We didn't really have to profile our apps because, well, I know it runs on my iPad perfectly. It will run perfectly on everybody else's. But the situation is changing now. With split view and multitasking with iPad, we don't have the ability to guarantee that we have access to every single resource of the device, because secondary apps run maybe just as intensive CPU or require just as much memory as your app does. So, we really need to be making sure that we have very lean and fast apps. So I highly recommend, if you've got an iPad app that's in the App Store today, download a free profiler and just check out how your app's actually performing. And you'll find that there are places where you've got a couple of memory leaks that you need to fix, and you'll find that key areas of where you can improve your app's performance and make it work nicely is multitasking mode. But Apple have implemented a couple of approaches to multi-touch. This is the split view approach, and in this situation, the width of your app is actually dynamic. So in order to do multitasking on the iPad, you're going to have to have used storyboards. Now, I know a lot of developers, and myself is included in this, I try and avoid to use storyboards when I'm building the proof of concept because it adds a lot of complexity to the layout of your app. But we're getting to a point now where Apple is very keen for us developers to move away from constraints-based with the constructs where we're anchoring from left to right, and we're defining that we want it to resize horizontally, but we want it glued to the top of the screen. They want us to get away from that, and they want us to use auto layouts. If we want to support multitasking for iPad, we're going to need to move over to auto layouts. Now, I'll give you one tip for how you can do that. Just think of auto layouts as start from top left to bottom right, grab the control, make sure you set an X and a Y, and how you want it to resize. So is it a fixed width, a fixed height, or am I dynamically resizing to the person next to me? Once you realize that everything needs an X and a Y and how I resize, then auto layouts actually becomes very easy. You just have to be very methodical about it. Rather than being gung-ho and drawing blue lines within Xamarin Studio or Visual Studio, you need to have a process. Once you've got the process, it's extraordinarily simple, and you can take advantage of things like split view, which, as I say, the user is able to resize how large your app is. So the OS is going to deal with laying it out and making it look beautiful no matter what the size. And of course, with things like tvOS, well, that uses storyboards as well, and that requires you to use auto layouts with size classes as well. So you'll be able to take your existing iPad app and even your iPad storyboard and run that on tvOS. So there's a huge, huge benefit for implementing and going with auto layouts rather than just sticking with the easy way, which is, I know a lot of us do it because it is so much easier. So that's split view. We also have a couple of options. So there's two more options for doing multi-touch on the iPad. We have slide over, which allows you to temporarily run a second app. Again, you're going to need to use auto layouts for all of these, but I think most people are going to be doing the split view, and you'll want to make sure that you've got that down. And this is what slide over looks like. Your app is going to be down to a fixed size of 694 pixels, but again, the OS is going to deal with the laying out for you. So as long as you've got storyboards implemented, and you've implemented all your size classes as well, then iOS is going to deal with how to resize it so that your app looks fantastic no matter what size it's been given. And then for those of you who are building TV streaming apps or movie streaming apps, Apple have given us picture-in-picture, which allows us to run a second iOS app in a floating panel. Now, what's interesting about this is Apple have said that they want this to be used for streaming services and movies and playing back of content. But I have seen, and I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure this is using private APIs, but I have seen that it's possible to actually run just a standard UI view in there. So people have been able to run their own apps within this picture-in-picture. But as I say, I'm pretty sure that's going to be using private APIs. But if you're shipping, if you're shipping an app to your employees, then why not? So a couple of things for the iPad. You're going to need to build against iOS 9 or greater. You're not going to be able to use multitasking if you build against iOS 8. It's just not possible. Again, with the storyboards, your launch screens before, if you've got that constraints-based layout, your storyboards, your launch screen, sorry, is probably going to be image assets because you knew how big your your app was going to be when it launched, because it was always going to be this size for an iPad and it was always going to be X size for an iPhone. But now that our apps can launch with variable sizes, we're going to need to make sure that we're using auto layouts and storyboards for our launch screens. So it's really simple. We've got support for creating this all in Xamarin Studio and Visual Studio. In fact, if you create a new project, a new Xamarin iOS project, by default we're going to give you the launch screen as a storyboard file, so you don't have to do any more work. As I keep mentioning, because it really is important, auto layouts. You need to make sure that every single one of your views uses auto layouts, and you're also going to need to make sure that your device supports that your app supports all device orientations. So what happens when you've got an app that you don't want to share the resources of the iPad? You've decided this app is too important, or every pixel on this screen matters to me. You may have built a game or an interactive, immersive app where you need it all. Well, Apple have given us the ability to set a property within the info.p list. You just say UI requires full screen equals yes, and you're good to go. You don't need to do anything more, and you've told iOS, so even if you hit that checklist, you've told iOS, under no circumstance do I want to be able to run in multitask with this app, please. And it will take heed of that, and you're good to go consuming all the resources. So let's talk about search. Search is actually my favorite feature of iOS 9. I think that it solves a number of problems that we developers have had, especially consumer-facing developers. I write all my apps and put them in the App Store so that people can download them. I'm not writing enterprise apps. And I find that app discoverability is a little difficult. I think we're all guilty to some degree of gaming the tag system, where you just keep adding tags and keywords to your metadata for your App Store submissions to try and improve your rankings. But because everyone's doing it and there's millions and millions of apps, getting discovered can be very difficult. And developers have been moaning at Apple for a while about this. We've been saying, you need to fix search in the App Store. And Apple have done, a pretty standard thing for Apple, and I think they solved the problem in a way that none of us expected that they would. And so what they've done is they've given us these search APIs. So the key thing here is that your app's content is searchable, but it's not just searchable from the device. You can set this to be searchable from any device. So if you've got an app, let's say this hotel app, where you've got thousands of hotels, where you can make this publicly available to iOS users that don't have your app installed, and we'll talk about that more in detail in a moment. So the wonderful thing with this searching approach is that, let's say I want to find a hotel in my general area, or I see a hotel and I type in its name within the iOS search results, or I say, hey Siri, tell me more about the Grand Hotel Guildford. Well, Siri can go and search the web, which she's always been able to do, but she can search for publicly indexed information. So let's say 1,000 people have got my hotel app installed, and they've gone and tapped on Grand Hotel Guildford, and we've publicly indexed that. We've said, this content is useful. People are clicking on this or tapping on this. We want to publicly index it. After a certain threshold, Apple starts to take notice of this. 1,000 people have said that this is useful. We'll make this public. And so, just through searching Grand Hotel Guildford on my device, because I've got the app installed, I'm able to go straight into the application and find the activity. So find the data about the Grand Hotel Guildford just by tapping on the result in the top hit. Boom! I'm straight in there, looking at the reviews, looking at photos. But now, my friend Bob, he doesn't have the app installed, but he still wants to find out the information. Apple have publicly indexed it because we asked them to, and it proves to be useful information. So Bob goes and searches Grand Hotel Guildford, and it brings up my app as a suggested item. It's basically telling Bob, other people find information about the Grand Hotel Guildford useful within this app? Do you want to install it? So Bob clicks on, yep, I want that, thank you very much. It's going to take him to the App Store. And it's going to say, do you want to download this? Yes, I do, thank you very much. It downloads onto Bob's phone and it launches straight into the activity. So it'll take him straight to the information that he was looking for. So no more do users have to go into the App Store and find apps to search for specific things. I'm building a beer tracking application. I'm not going to have users go into the App Store and search beer, where they'll find results for numerous things such as local beer festivals. You've got the apps that came out, the first iPhone apps that came out where you would tilt the phone and it would look like you were drinking a beer. The users won't see any of that because they will just ask their phone, tell me about Stella Artois, and because my app's got all the useful information about Stella Artois, Apple have said, this is the app for you. They tap that, boom. I get a download, but more importantly, even if they haven't tapped on my app and they went to Wikipedia, which was the top suggested website, they still see my logo, they still see my brand. So it's very, very cool. So that's a public index. Now, obviously, not everything that we have on our devices do we want to publicly index. There are some situations where we just, I don't want to share that information. I want it to be private. So it's an opt-in. You set a property within your NS user activity, which for the more astute of you will know that came in iOS 9 for handoff and continuity. So it's just an extension of how to get back to an application state. So if you've already implemented handoff and continuity, then you're 95% of the way there to implementing search. And I'll actually show you a snippet of code in a couple more slides, which shows you just how simple this is. So as I say, public or private, you get the choice. But if it was down to me, with all my public-facing apps where they're just pulling in information, I'd absolutely go with the public index because it's going to make my app way more discoverable. So we actually got 3 APIs for search with iOS 9. 2 of them are on device. One of them is the NS user activity, which we've just talked about, which is the search API that I'm most excited for. Apple also gave us Core Spotlight. Now, Core Spotlight, you can index any app content. So as I said before, Apple's very keen with NS user activity that we only index useful information. So when users go and click on an item and we pull up the data about the hotel or the data about the bottle of wine, at that point we add it to the index. Whereas with Core Spotlight, because it's private information, you can't share the results of Core Spotlight on the internet. It's unique to the individual user. Well, we can index everything. And we can tell Apple to go and index bits. So we can say, we're interested in this, and iOS will just go and index it in the background so that we don't have to be actively involved in that. We just write a small amount of code, again, very minimal amounts of code, and we're good to go. So NS user activity, publicly indexed, will take you back to an application state. Core Spotlight is going to be perfect for, you've got friends lists, you've done in-app purchases, or just general information that you're not going to want to share off the device, but it's still useful to search for. If you've built a banking application or a finance tracking application, you 100% wouldn't want to publish all of your users' finances into iOS search results for every user, but you certainly want to be able to search within the individual search results. And then on top of that, Apple have given us web markup, which isn't going to be on device. This is something you would go and implement on your web server. So it's just a markup in order to add more metadata so that you can get the search results into iOS. So you can go all 3 prongs if you want, and you can mark the items with a key so that we don't show any duplicates. So with the hotels, for example, I'm going to use NS user activities, I'm going to use Core Spotlight, but I'm also going to use web markup. Because if I haven't hit the threshold for Apple taking note with the NS user activity for a particular hotel, I still want the result to be found, so it will get found using web markup. Or it's already installed, and I'm going to use Core Spotlight in order to find that information. So you don't have to pick one of these. You really can implement all 3, and it's pretty trivial to do. So why prepare for search? Well, as I said before, it's increased discoverability. This is going to change the way that people find apps in the iOS App Store. This, to me, is almost as big as the App Store itself being announced. I don't think many developers have cottoned on to the fact just how important this is going to be. It's going to improve user experience. At the moment, we have to go into the app and search within individual apps to get content. And, we're not animals. We've got search within iOS. Let's use that. So massively improved user experience for our end users. And then, as I say, more downloads. Our apps are going to be discovered more. We're going to get more downloads, which is going to increase revenue. So for a couple of lines of code, which I'm just about to show you, we can do all of this. So here we go. Here's the code. And as I said before, this is based on NS user activity. So for those of you who don't know where this comes from, this was, as I said before, iOS 8 introduced this for handoff. So this allows you to hand off an application state between devices. So I could be, writing an email on my phone, and when I come to my Mac laptop, it detects that I'm nearby, and it brings up the email icon in the dock on the Mac. And I simply click on the dock icon, and boom, it's pulled in the draft without me having to do anything. I've not saved it to drafts on the phone. It's just pulled in the application state from my iPhone and displayed it on my Mac. And I can go the other way as well, or I go iPhone to iPhone, iPhone to iPad. It doesn't matter. As long as it's within the Apple ecosystem, then I can just share the application state. So with NS user activity, really easy to get back to where we were. And the idea of the searching is that we're going to add keywords and metadata to allow us to get back to a particular point within an application. So in this case, we want to get back to useful information that users have found. And you can see the code here, and I've actually put this on GitHub, and there's a link at the end so you can go and see just how easy this is to implement. You can see that we've got some information about monkeys, and we're adding keywords, which is a monkey's name. Now, I could add more keywords. I could add the full description there if I wanted, but in this case, the name is more than sufficient. But I'm using CoreSpotlight.cs searchable item attribute set. Now, that is reusable between the NS user activity and the Core Spotlight approach to searching. So we can reuse the content attribute set no matter which search implementation we've taken. So as I say, it really is easy to get this added to your app, and you can already reuse your implementations from NS user activity to Core Spotlight. So that's search. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other more subtle changes to iOS. I'm not sure if any of you remember, I think it was in 2008, might have been a bit later than that, but a company that I won't name got into a bit of trouble on Twitter and on social media for people discovering that when you installed their app, they were pulling all of your contact details off your device and pushing it into their servers. And Apple said, this isn't on, so Apple implemented that when an app tries to get access to the address book, they would pop up a little notification say, hey, this app wants to access your address book. Are you okay with this? And you'd be like, yes, I'm pretty okay with that. And then at that point, the developer gets access to every single contact within your address book. So, it didn't really stop the developers from doing this. But Apple has made a change. So they've deprecated AddressBook and AddressBook UI, and what they've given us instead is Contacts and ContactsUI. And it's a new, simpler framework. But I should add that it's much, much simpler for the Objective-C guys, because AddressBook was just a C-based API. So we've always been able, as C# developers, to consume that in an object-oriented fashion. Those guys haven't. So this is a huge change for them, but for us, it's really not that big. They're just catching up with the awesome that we've had for a while. But in terms of functionality of how do they stop you pulling all the data off? Well, with ContactsUI, you bring up the UI that Apple specifies. You no longer get this app wants to access your contacts, and you only return the contact that the user taps on. So if you wanted to select every single item from the contact or address book, you would have to select, from top to bottom in order to publish that to your server. So this is a great thing for users and security and privacy and all of that. But if your app is doing that, pulling data like that off the device and realize that Apple has put the writing on the wall that this is deprecated, you need to stop doing this. So very minor change. The API still work for the moment, but expect them to be switched off in coming versions of iOS. So I want to talk about the new stack view. I mentioned earlier on about how auto layouts can be difficult. There's no getting away from that. I struggle whenever I do proof of concepts. I just turn it off because I'm so much more productive without auto layouts than I am with it. So Apple have taken notice of this, and they've given us a new. It kind of is a control, but it's a control unlike any other control that we've got. So UI Stack View, it allows you to add controls. So it's a layout effectively. So it inherits from UI view, but it doesn't have a background color. So it's a really strange part of iOS, but it is actually really cool. So within this picture here, you can see I've got a number of controls, and all I've done here is just drag them in, and iOS is laying them out for me. And all I did was set a margin and say that for most of these, I want them to be laid out vertically. And then you can see the Xamarin logos at the bottom. Well, that's another stack view with it laid out horizontally with another margin set. And this will resize and look great no matter what device I'm running on. And I haven't had to deal with drawing blue lines and dealing with the madness of auto layouts. So it's hidden that complexity from me. So if you are worried about how you're going to move your app to auto layouts, you want to just play around. You don't want to get too committed to it. Have a play with the stack view, because it makes things so much easier, and it will mean you can get your app running on tvOS and you can get your app running in multitask for the iPad really quickly. So Apple also gave us the addition to control to drag to reorder the collection views, which is really nice. So collection views are probably when I'm looking at people's codes, the most underused feature of iOS, and it's insanely powerful. You can create your own custom layouts for this, and it makes drawing and laying out of your controls really easy. And naturally, you can do cell reuse so that the memory isn't massive. It's a really nice collection views is a really nice API in addition to iOS. But it's been around for a long time. But if we wanted to implement drag to reorder, well, we'd have to do that manually. Where now, it's just a property and it's super simple to get added. So if you've got collection view and you've written your own code for drag to reorder, know that you can get rid of that and just use the properties. So I'd really like to talk about ATS, which is App Transport Security. So this is a pretty major addition to iOS. So what Apple wants from us now as developers is that any time you make a call to the outside world that we don't use this HTTP, that we use HTTPS instead. Now, naturally, this is going to break a lot of people's apps. The app that I'm writing at the moment, which is using Azure Mobile Service Client, well, that stopped working when I upgraded to iOS 9 because of ATS. I was helping a colleague with a Salesforce client. He was updating it to work with iOS 9 to get around the ATS issue, and because the current version component store won't work with ATS switched on. So just be aware. And the thing with ATS is that when you deploy your debug build and you're running it, iOS will give you a very strange set of errors. So you're writing C#, but it will return to you and say, there's an NS-URL session error. Well, I haven't instantiated any NS-URL session, so what's going on here? It won't explicitly say, or it very rarely explicitly says that this is an ATS error. Now, fortunately for us, it's exceptionally easy to disable, and there's no problem with disabling it at the moment. I think this is very much like how we all needed to move over to Unified to get the 64-bit, and then Apple made that, a rule. All apps now need to do 64-bit. I think the writing's on the wall with this one, that we're all going to have to support ATS at some point. I think we've probably got a good 6 to 8 months before Apple make it a priority or a forced rule for submissions. But I'm going to show you how to disable it. There we go. So it's just one addition to the info.plist, and you're good to go. So it's just ns allows arbitrary loads, and then boom, good to go. And all of your data will just work how it did with iOS 6, iOS 7, iOS 8. But as I say, you're going to need to fix it, but a lot of it is dependent on the component vendors. So I'm certainly waiting for that to be updated. So what else? So there are some enhancement to HomeKit and handoff. Now naturally there's an enhancement to handoff simply because Apple have been deep within MS user activity for the searching. HomeKit's a very interesting one. I'd say to anyone listening that is interested in developing a side project, or they haven't found the dream consumer app that they want to build, go and look at HomeKit. So Apple announced this with iOS 8, but it's been highly dependent on hardware manufacturers of these intelligent devices picking up with the API, because this is something that is not only software with our APIs, but it has to be implemented with the hardware. And we've just started to see, I think as of June or July, we just started to see some hardware hit the market that is HomeKit enabled. But right now, it's still using all the independent manufacturers' little apps. So you have an app to turn on your wall sockets and you have an app to turn on your lights, but that nobody has created an app to control all of it. And because it's using HomeKit, all of those devices are in a central database that you can query, and they've all got the same API. So if someone were to make a home automation app for iOS, especially for the iPad, yeah, that would be my #1 recommendation if someone wanted to build a new app. But there's lots of enhancements to the APIs, and I think HomeKit is going to be a big thing for iOS 10. So if you're a gamer or you're building games, Apple have given us a whole new set of APIs. So they've improved performance, they've improved the APIs that we get with Metal. So gaming is just wonderful with iOS 9. And also they've improved right to less language support. So if you've got an app where you're targeting it into a country where they speak Arabic, then it's much improved with iOS 9. But again, you're not going to need to really do anything for this. It's just an improvement of the OS. So here's a link to the code that I'm about to show you. So let's have a look. So you'll need to go, if you want to have a play with this, you'll need to go to my GitHub, and it's called Monkey Search. You can download it and have a play with it yourself. But let's have a look through the code. So just like any Xamarin project, I've got a portable class library here because I want to share as much code as I can. There's no point in writing code if it's only for one platform. And this is going off and fetching some data from a web API. And I've built myself an iOS app. So if we pull up the storyboard, we'll just wait for that to load. And what's nice is our new storyboard is 100% native Coca layout, so we can do zooming with a trackpad, which is brand new. So no longer do we have to go up here and start clicking around. So that's very nice. But whilst we're waiting for that, we'll actually just load up the app within the simulator. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, no, here we go. It's good to go. So you can see here the layout of the application. Got a view controller, the master detail, just like I was saying most apps are. You're displaying a list of information, and then you go to some product information in a detail view. So let's run this on iOS 9. And we'll go to the products view controller whilst it's deploying to the device. And we'll see here that I've overridden the view did load. And what I wanted to do there was create an activity. Because the activity is where we do, adding the keywords and adding the metadata so that we can search this. Now, I only want to log the metadata and keywords for a particular activity or bit of information when the user interacts with it. So, I create this in the item tabs, and you can see here a quote from Apple. This is straight from their docs. So you should not blindly add thousands of items using NS user activity in Core Spotlight. Instead, focus on adding items that the users actually interact with or have identified as meaningful in some way. So Apple has been very, very clear within their documentation that if you go and add thousands of items, you iterate through every item within your database, then they're going to actually mark you down in terms of your rankings. So if you want to get highly ranked, only ever index the data that's important to the user. So here we go. Here we've got the app. We can click within, boom, and we've pulled up some information on ABSL. We can pause to refresh. It's a lovely looking iOS app. But none of these will be added to my index until I actually tap on them. So at the moment I tap, at that point I'm creating the activity. I'm saying I need to save it, and I'm returning the activity and saying, this app's current user activity is this. So let's just do ABSL. Now you have to tap on the items a few times every now and again to get iOS to pick it up, but let's see. If we type in, there we go. So we've got the search result there. And if I tap it, we'll go straight back to where we were. So you can see, about 20 lines of code, and we've got search implemented for iOS. And I already had the product information because I would normally go to a details page. So very, very simple to add this functionality to your existing iOS apps. So thank you very much, and I think we've got some questions, so I'll have a look through the doc that we've got here. Dun, dun, dun. So John asks, any idea when the iOS simulator will support 3D Touch? So Apple said it's not supported in the simulators, but there are rumors that they're looking to support this. It kind of makes sense that they would support this within the iOS simulator. It's quite strange that they didn't add it by default. I don't know why that is, but I think we can rest assured that this is going to be an addition to the iOS simulator at some point. Because they have actually implemented that you can do force touch simulation for Apple Watch when you're doing the Apple Watch simulator. So it's not groundbreaking technology that they've got to go and implement here. They've pretty much got it solved already for another one of their devices. And somebody else asked, is Xamarin Test Cloud able to support 3D Touch? And as I mentioned, it's not yet. So it's a brand new feature. So we will be working on that. We have just received the 6S's into Denmark, so we'll get those online as quickly as possible. But then we then have to make additions to the APIs that we give to you guys in order to call into that. So someone's asked where you can download the Xamarin Profiler, because as I mentioned with multitasking, you really do want to make sure that your app is as performant as possible. So this is a really easy one. You can grab that from HTTPS, let's be secure, xamarin.com/profiler. So that's xamarin.com/profiler. Somebody has asked if Zibs are supported for multitasking. So as a minimum, you're going to need to be doing storyboards because you need to use auto layouts. So if you're using Zibs, then you really need to update a storyboard. For those of you who don't know, Zibs are the old way of creating your UIs for iOS. But then Apple gave us storyboards where we have effectively all of our Zibs laid out and we can view the app in its entirety. So for those of you who've got your apps built with Zibs, do ensure that you update to a storyboard. And then once you've updated the storyboard, at that point you'll probably need to, well, you will need to implement auto layouts. But stage one, go and update storyboards. I learned with Zibs, and that's where I felt most comfortable, and I built some pretty big apps using Zibs. But then it really wasn't that difficult to get started with storyboards. So, how is screen sizing stuff best handled in Xamarin.forms apps? So Xamarin.forms lays out the app for you. So if your app will already work across multiple screen sizes, so be it the iPhone 5, iPhone 6, iPhone 6S or 6 Plus, it doesn't really matter. You'll just need to ensure that you've got the launch screen storyboard, and then you should be good to go. When will Xamarin for TV OS be available? So we're working pretty hard to get that started. I don't think we've got any fixed date for when it's coming out, but I'm hearing very, very positive things from the engineers. So our CTO Miguel gives some information and some history about where we're at, because there's a lot of similarities between watchOS or watchOS 2 and tvOS. And if you go to our CTO's blog, I'm not going to try and read the URL, but it's Miguel's blog. You'll be able to read about watchOS, and then that should give you a pretty good understanding of where we are with tvOS. I think it's probably safe to say we will be supporting the chat from the engineering team. Seems to be very positive. Is using Azure Mobile Services for Xamarin? Is using Azure Mobile Services from Xamarin Forms? What do we need to do to cope with ATS? So Azure is HTTPS by default. The certificate probably already meets ATS requirement, but you do need to declare the insecure URLs. So I think where I was hitting problems with Azure, as I mentioned earlier, was actually within my Facebook authentication. So I was using social auth. So it was only when I loaded the web view to go and do the social auth that I hit the error. So I think I should probably go and investigate that more. But as I say, I think if I was shipping apps today that we are affected by ATS, I would just go ahead and turn it off for right now and sit back and wait a little longer. So how about Xamarin Forms to support these additional features from iOS? So not all of them are possible. Things like peek and pop. It's going to be pretty difficult to implement. You would have to go down the route of a custom renderer. But our colleague Craig Dunn has got a blog post that he's written on his personal blog, which we can possibly link to afterwards. I will tweet it. So if you're looking for that, just you can see my screen, so you can see mikecodes.net. I will tweet the link, which is entitled iOS 9ify your Xamarin Forms app, so that you can get access to search for using Xamarin Forms. So that's pretty interesting. And he also links to a GitHub repository, so you can go and see how he's actually implemented this. So someone's asked, if we're building apps for iOS 7, 8, and 9, can we use search functionalities only for iOS 9? So it's correct. It will only work with iOS 9. If you add these new APIs, it's not going to work for iOS 7. You're not going to be able to get the contents of your application within iOS 7 in your iOS 9 built app. So I'm just seeing if there's any other questions. They're being written as we speak, so bear with me. So Xamarin Forms in iPad split view. Yes, it will work as long as you follow the instructions to have the launch screen storyboard, because it naturally supports all iPad orientations. So if you're using Xamarin Forms to build iPad apps, just make sure you'll need to get out the portable class library and dig into the platform-specific project, which is in this case is Xamarin iOS, and you'll need to find launchscreen.storyboard, or if you haven't got the launchscreen.storyboard and you're using image assets, you'll need to get rid of those and you'll need to specify the launch screen storyboard, and then you should be good to go. Is there any way around the limitation needs for split view storyboards for split view functionality? So I think the person's trying to ask about can they still do split view but without storyboards, and the answer is no. Apple is very clear. If I pop back to the previous slide, this is the requirement you have to have all of these, all four of these, in order to support split view functionality for the iPad. Now, it's worth noting that the iPad, there's only, well, at the moment there's only one device I think that actually supports it, one iPad. In November with the iPad Pro coming out, there will be more, but right now it's not a huge priority. So I would say you've probably got a few months before you really need to start worrying about this kind of thing. So if you're using Zibs or you're not using auto layouts and you still want to do split view for iOS, then make sure that you've got these four things checked off on your list. Dun, dun, dun. Could you please post a link to the iOS Search API example code? Yeah, it's actually just on my GitHub, so it's pretty easy to go and find. So you can find me on GitHub. Let's pull this up. Here we go. So it's not the exact same search, but it's pretty similar. It's using the same code for adding the user activity, but instead of fetching from a remote data source, it's actually just got a helper class in there with, I think it's an observable collection of type monkey. But it's very basic. But it shows you how to implement the search. It's very simple. So there is the page and the URL if you're really struggling. There you go. So I'm just reading some more questions. So someone is asking about laying out their layouts in code and not Zibs. So as far as I'm aware, as long as you're using auto layouts, then you should be good to go. So I think if you're laying your code out, programmatically, it's a lot of work. And you're kind of, if you're going to be dealing with resizing and moving things around, you're kind of recreating what auto layouts does for you. So I would just, I understand the allure, especially back in the day when we were all using Zibs and merging them was a nightmare. In fact, most of the time when you would merge a Zib, you would just break the entire thing. But I would highly recommend now to move away from laying out your controls in code and just adopting auto layouts and size classes. It makes maintaining your project pretty easy. So someone's asked about the changes to iOS and with regards to games, and do any of these relate to mono game? I don't actually know the answer to that. I'm pretty sure that the mono game guys will be quick to take advantage of some of these newer APIs. But a lot of what's changed in iOS is just kind of performance increases and optimizations. I think we can probably think of iOS 9 as kind of a service pack. We've got a couple of interesting new features, but on the whole, it's been about making it a bit leaner, a bit faster, adding a couple of features here and there. The priority, I think, for Apple with iOS 9 was mostly, focusing on iPad, which makes sense, especially with the iPad Pro. So I think that's all that's done. So I'm going to pass back to Julia. So thank you very much for listening. And if you've got any questions after this, then you can feel free to email me, mike@xamarin.com, or tweet at me, or however you want to get in touch. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for attending. Some really great questions there. And as Mike mentioned, please email him if you have any follow-up questions, and we'll aim to get them all answered for you. Just a reminder that this was recorded, and you will get a copy of it in the coming days. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.